Okay, fantastic. Welcome to the final day of the 8th Annual MQ Mental Health Science Festival. MQ Mental Health Research is a leading global mental health charity that's invested over $25 million into research across the translational spectrum and care continuum all over the world. My name is Lee Milligan. I'm the CEO of MQ Mental Health. My pronouns are he and him. A big welcome from me. This year's festival has been organised by an international and multidisciplinary panel of individuals from 6 countries around the world, collectively bringing a wide range of expertise, including mental health activists, academics, lived experience experts, policy advisors, all led by the scientific chair of this year's Science Festival, Helen Fisher. A huge thank you to all of them, and we'll be thanking them at the end again of the session. A huge thank you also goes out to Wellcome, who have funded this year's conference and have made all the tickets freely available, hopefully expanding the number of people that can join. We've had over 400 delegates register across the 5 days. The aims of this year's festival are to convene a whole range of disciplines and sectors to collaborate and share research and learnings to progress the field of mental health science. And specifically today, we're recognizing that to transform mental health, we need a cadre of highly skilled researchers passionate about using their expertise to benefit people's lives. Mental health research is constrained by the scale of the workforce, with an urgent need to increase its size and diversity. In this final day of the Science Festival, we're going to examine the opportunities and career paths for mental health researchers. The talks and panel discussions from today and from the whole week will be recorded and made available on the MQ YouTube channel, and you can find the link in the chat. We're excited to have an international and diverse audience here today and throughout the week, including people with lived experience of mental health, researchers from many different career stages, mental health practitioners, representatives from NGOs, community organizations, funding organizations, and many more. You'll notice that throughout the festival, we will be referring to people without professional titles, and this is to make sure that everyone feels an equal contributor in this space, and I hope you feel really welcome today. Please do remember when commenting that we have a diverse audience watching, including people with lived and living experience of mental health issues, so please be kind and respectful in all of our comments. Throughout this week, we'll be discussing topics that some people might find upsetting. If you feel at any point that you need support, then please do check out MQ's help page, which you can find a link to in the chat. And at any point, if you need to step back, turn your camera off and sound off, then please do. If you're on Twitter or other social media platforms, we're really keen to hear your thoughts on the talks and discussions. Please use the hashtag MQ Science Festival. And today we'll be live tweeting the sessions of everything that's going on, so do get involved in the conversation. During the talks and panel discussions, we're in a Zoom webinar format, so you won't be able to turn on your sound or your camera, but you can use the chat to have conversation around what's going on. And if you've got a specific question to ask any of the panelists, please do put that into the Q&A box, and that will be passed to the chair of each symposium. Later today, we'll also be moving into a breakout space to have further conversations with our speakers, and you'll hear more about that at the end. For now, I'd like to encourage everyone to introduce yourself in the chat by answering 3 questions. Firstly, your name and any social media handles, which part of the world you're joining us from today, and what do you think the biggest barrier is to developing a career in mental health? So your name, where you're from, and what is the biggest challenge you believe in developing a career in mental health research? As I say, please do type into the comment section, and if you've got specific questions, drop them in the Q&A box throughout the talks. I'm now going to hand over to the chair of this year's conference, Helen Fisher. Helen is a professor of developmental psychopathology at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience at King's College London. Helen's research focuses on early risk factors that predict the development and persistence of psychotic experiences in childhood. We're delighted that Helen has been an MQ Fellow. She's also received several other national and international awards, including a recent Emerging Leaders Prize in Adolescent Mental Health from the UK Medical Research Foundation. We're excited and delighted to have Helen as the chair of MQ's Mental Health Science Festival this year. Helen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lee. Really wonderful to be here, and an incredibly warm welcome from me for the very final day of this wonderful week of festival from MQ. Really great to be here and excited to hear from our multidisciplinary and international panel of experts today. And we're going to be exploring, as Lee said, several career options in mental health research and hearing about different journeys that could lead to those careers. If you've attended previous days of the festival, you'll notice today's programme is a little bit different. So we've got first talks from our wonderful speakers, followed by a panel discussion and Q&A, but you'll also have the opportunity to ask further questions and have longer conversations about career options during the Zoom meeting at the end of today's session. Later, I'll also be announcing the winner of the poster prize for this festival, and we'll see some more of those TikTok posters later on today. So let's move on to the first session, which will be chaired by the absolutely fantastic Niall Boyce. So Niall is the current head of field building in mental health at the Wellcome Trust. After studying medicine at Oxford University, Niall joined The Lancet as a senior editor in 2010 and launched The Lancet Psychiatry as its first editor-in-chief in 2014. Niall joined Wellcome as head of field building in mental health in 2021. He's really passionate and interested in bringing the mental health community together to identify and focus on specific areas with the potential to improve the lives of people experiencing mental health issues. So without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Niall for the first session. Thanks, Niall.
Thank you very much, Helen. It's absolutely fantastic to be here and to be introducing such a great panel. As anyone who's watched the past few days will have gleaned, mental health is an extraordinarily rich and diverse field, and therefore what we need is a great diversity of people within that field. Everyone is welcome and everyone is necessary, I believe, to really move us forward to where we want to be in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So I'm not going to talk too much about myself, but I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel one by one in turn as they talk to us, and that will be followed by a Q&A. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to as many as we can. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Ethel Nakamuli-Mpungu, who is from Makerere University, and Ethel is going to talk to us about becoming an independent researcher in a low resource setting. Ethel, Ethel, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your sound is cutting in and out. I wonder, is your camera off? Maybe if you turn your camera off, we'll be able to. Okay, Ethel, I'm afraid we seem to have lost you, which is an experience I think many of us have had in the Zoom meetings over the past few years. These things happen. We'll get back to Ethel when we can. So if it's okay, we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Manvi Tiwari of the Global Mental Health Peer Network. And Manvi, I'm sorry that you're speaking slightly sooner than we had anticipated, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about lived experience, activism and expertise, difference, object and ground zero. Manvi.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Manvi Tiwari. I am the country executive of India at the Global Mental Health Peer Network. I am a person with lived experience of obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety. My lived experience dates back to when my mother was diagnosed with depression and obsessive compulsive disorder when I was 12 years old. So I also have lived experience as a carer. Can we move to the next slide, please? Today, the career that I'll be talking about is one that you're unlikely to hear about in a setting like this, and that is that of a lived experience expert or an activist. To begin with, let's start by clearing out some very common misconceptions or preconceived biases about the term itself, lived experience expert and activist. We often use these terms interchangeably, and I don't blame it because they're also implemented interchangeably in the present day scenario. So a lived experience expert is basically somebody who, I'll actually start with a lived experience activist, that's easier to explain. A lived experience activist is somebody who fights for a place at the decision-making table for people who live or have lived with anxiety or other mental health conditions or mental distress. While a lived experience expert is somebody, when there is already a place at the decision-making table, they are the people who give their inputs and help design programs, policies, and so on. That's the basic difference between a lived experience expert and an activist. However, present-day scenario, as I said, they are termed and they are used and implemented interchangeably. However, the goal is to get to a time when even those without lived experience will fight for a place at the decision-making table for those with lived experience. Move to the next slide, please. When we speak about a career, I think a big part of that is knowing what you're expected to do and where you're headed as part of a professional in that career field. So some of the things that one as a lived experience activist or an expert is expected to do is raise the profile of mental health. And this is also one of the most widely recognized use of lived experience. The second one would be provide qualitative information. So as a lived experience expert, it's important that you lend your lived experience to those in academia or to researchers in order for them to yield more accurate evidence and more quality information, which can then be translated into change, again, by those in lived experience. I will talk more about this in my slides further. The third one and the fourth one are quite intertangled, and they are strengthening the stakeholder engagement mechanism and developing a stakeholder leadership mechanism. We have quite a stakeholder engagement mechanism, but what we do not have is a stakeholder leadership mechanism, and we're actively working towards that. So I think one of the important parts of being a lived experience activist or expert is also that you're supposed to strengthen the lived experience mechanism and how people with lived experience are involved in decision making, and how they're not just involved or engaged, but are given are in positions of power. The last one, but it's actually not the last. The list is very long. This is one. These are some of the few that I shortlisted. The last one here is questioning policies and frameworks. I think a big part of being an activist, not just a lived experience activist or expert, is that you need to question policies, frameworks, or even statements that are put out by anybody who's in power position or anybody around you in your daily life. I think those are some of the objects of being a lived experience activist or an expert. Can we move to the next slide, please? The next two slides basically are just for you to have an understanding of what my analogy on mental health and its development is, and where I place lived experience activism and expertise at. I think mental health development basically has two pillars, one of them being academia, which is researchers and a lot of other academics, while the other one is lived experience. There's also an external pillar that we have, which is policymakers, and I'll elaborate in my next slide more about how lived experience plays the role of a translator between academia and policymakers. Next slide, please. I think it all starts with lived experience. It is lived experience that is taken by the academia and is used to yield accurate evidence, information, and reports, which are then again by lived experience acting as a translator, are being taken to policymakers by experts and activists, and policymakers translate that exact evidence, reports, and information into change, taking that as the base. So I think I've always said this before, and I'll say this once again, lived experience acts as a translator, and the entire process of mental health development starts and ends with lived experience, because it is lived experience that the academia analyzes and yields out information and statistics on, and it is also lived experience which will at the end be affected by policies and laws and strategies and programs that are put out by policymakers or those in power positions. Next slide, please. The last slide talks about...
So I was just going to say you have about 30 seconds left, but you're on the last slide, so I will step back out and allow you to finish.
Thank you. The last slide talks about ground zero, which is basically where to start from as a lived experience activist or a lived experience expert. I think a very integral part of that is stories, because out of all the people that have all the doctorates, double digits in doctorates, in fact, and accreditations, why should somebody listen to you? And that is the answer to that is your lived experience, that I have this lived experience and I have this story, and this is all that I've been through and done. And that is why I am the right person that people should hear here. The next one is networks. I think networks such as my own, the one that I belong to, the Global Mental Health Peer Network, it's very important to be parts of such networks, because at the end, I think these networks somehow act as focal points for opportunities, for innovations, and for a lot of other things that ultimately will help you grow in your journey as a lived experience activist or an expert. Harnessing the power of digital, this one needs no introduction. Digital has grown and is bound to grow even more, especially in LMIC, especially in countries like India, where from the youngest to the oldest, everybody has a phone in their hand, everybody is very prone to the internet. So I think it's very important to somehow take your activism, your expertise, and your advocacy online. The last one is something how I started my advocacy and expertise journey with, and that was I took part in consultations, in participations, in studies, and that was how I stepped into the world of mental health, and I started my journey as a lived experience activist and an expert, and that's how I think is a good way to step into the journey of an activist or an expert. The last thing that I want to end by saying is that as a lived experience expert or an activist, it's inevitable, in fact, to feel this way that, you know, you're at times going to be on tables where you're surrounded with people who have decades of experience and double digits in accreditations. And at that point, it's inevitable to question yourself and say that, why am I supposed to be here? And what have I done to be at this table? But then your lived experience is the answer to that. I think you speak your truth. And as I said, it starts and ends with lived experience. It is all about you. We can move to the next slide, and that would pretty much be the end of my presentation. I hope you take away something useful from here, and I hope I inspire somebody at least to become a lived experience expert and activist. Thank you.
That was absolutely fantastic, Manvi. Thank you very much for that. We are now going to see if we can get Ethel back. I'm just going to give this a few seconds to see if this works. And if not, we're going to move on to the next speaker. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties we've been having. If we can't have Ethel join us right now, we're going to look into maybe getting her to record her presentation, maybe for the YouTube channel. But let's see how it goes. Okay, so Ethel is still not on the line. So Ollie, if it's okay, we are going to move over to you. This is Ollie Zborowski, who is from the East Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Trust. And Ollie's going to talk about combining research and clinical practice, a psychiatric trainee's perspective on mental health research. Ollie.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to the session today and for my introduction, and also to Manvi for your really inspirational talk. That was fantastic to listen to. So as Niall has said, my name is Ollie. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a trainee psychiatrist. So that means that I am medically trained. I went to medical school, and after finishing medical school, I chose to work in mental health. And really today, I just want to tell you a little bit about my journey and some things that I've learned from experience. I'm fairly early on in my career, so I don't have all of the answers, but hopefully people will find this useful. So I went to medical school in the UK, and when I was at medical school, I was becoming more and more interested in mental health and mental health research. And I was really fortunate to be able to take a year out and study for a neuroscience degree. So it really gave me a great grounding in the science that underpins a lot of the conditions that we work with in mental health. And then following that, I was thinking about what I might like to do as a research project while I was at uni, and there were some various options, and one of them was a neuroimaging project. So using magnetic resonance imaging to look inside people's brains and to look at whether natural sounds calm people down and make people feel less stressed or anxious. And it was a really interesting study to be involved in. And that really sparked my interest in definitely working in mental health research. And I was really fortunate to be able to do my kind of basic training in medicine. So it's called foundation years in the UK. And there's similar processes everywhere where you do a couple of years of general duties and then move into training in mental health to become a psychiatrist. And I carried on in neuroimaging, and my interest now is really in dementia and trying to develop new techniques to try and diagnose dementia at an earlier stage. And I moved from the south coast of England up to Manchester, and I work in Lancashire now. And I'm really privileged because I get to have a career which involves clinical work, so seeing patients in the clinic, and also research. And I think that that's a really fantastic position to be in as a mental health professional. And so essentially what that means is that for 3 or 4 days a week, I am in the hospital or in the clinic. I see people, and I see people with all sorts of mental health problems, predominantly older people. So I see lots of people who have dementia or may have dementia, and that is fascinating And it really helps with my research because it means that I can see the problems that people have firsthand. I can talk to those patients, I can talk to their carers, to their loved ones, and I can really understand the problems that they have and get to know exactly what it is that they want the answers to. So trying to work with people like Manvi, people who have that lived experience. And then as a psychiatrist, I can bring that experience from the clinic into the research setting. And it means that I can ask the relevant questions when I'm doing neuroimaging related research. And I can make sure that what I'm trying to find out, what I'm trying to discover, is actually going to have a benefit for people. Because ultimately, as a clinician and as a researcher, we always want to do something that's going to benefit people who have mental health problems. And anything that I can do for that, I think is fascinating. I also have other research interest and another main research interest, which is COVID. And obviously that's only developed over the last couple of years. And I was really fortunate to be able to get involved in some research related to COVID that's currently being undertaken in Pakistan. And one of the great things that's come out of the pandemic, obviously a lot of terrible distress, but one of the good things is that we've all learned how to use things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. And so I'm really lucky to be working with some amazing researchers in Pakistan, looking into the impacts of COVID on the people of Pakistan. So what I would say is mental health research is difficult. It can be challenging to get into. Don't be afraid if you get pushed back. You're going to have funding bids rejected. You're going to not meet deadlines for things, and that's okay, because you will get there in the end if you carry on trying hard. If you are a junior researcher working in mental health, always listen to the patients, always listen to their carers, their loved ones, because they're the people who should be driving the questions so that we can make a difference. And finally, what I would say is, if somebody offers you an opportunity to do something, grab it with both hands, say yes. It may not work, it might not be what you're interested in, you can always leave at a later date. But if you're offered a chance, always try and take it. There we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ollie. I have so many questions, but they're going to have to wait for the panel discussion after we've heard these talks. And if you have any questions in the audience, please do pop them into the Q&A box. And as I say, we'll get to as many as we can. Now we're going to make a slight change to the program and move the next speaker up. So next we have one of the most thoughtful people who I think I've met in my years of involvement in mental health. And this is Nev Jones. And Nev is at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work. And Nev is going to be talking to us about philosophy, research, domestic and international service work, and lived experience activism, and unlikely career path. Nev.
Thanks, Niall, and it is great to be here. I thought I would just start by briefly describing my fairly kind of unorthodox and irregular personal kind of career path. So after, this is in the US context, after I graduated from high school, I moved directly to northern Nepal, to Chotara, and worked as a kind of an NGO worker across two organizations, one doing kind of cross-disability outreach and support work in ultra-rural mountainous parts of northern Nepal, and then supporting children in public and government schools, so kids from very kind of socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. This was during the sort of the period of the Nepali Civil War, so it was extremely kind of tumultuous and politically unstable there, and I eventually ended up moving from Nepal to Japan and training in a Zen monastery for a number of years before returning to the US, doing the, in a sense, more traditional undergraduate thing. I studied cross-cultural philosophy, Japanese intensively, and then philosophy of psychiatry as well, and then returned to Japan for a postgraduate Mambusho fellowship, and then came back to the US again to do a PhD in philosophy, at which point I finally developed and was diagnosed with schizophrenia, was actually terminated from my program, went through a very dark period of my life, and then really kind of reoriented to psychology, got a PhD in psychology, and then did a postdoc in medical anthropology. First faculty position was interdisciplinary, and now I'm in a school of social work. So a very kind of multi-layered path. Along the way, I've frequently encountered people who jumped to a number of assumptions about kind of doing these kind of very different areas of my life, of my background, not fitting together in their minds. Or looking like I lacked focus. I was told a number of times, people expressed concern about me when I was a graduate student, about me ever getting a position because of this background. And so I think the core message I wanted to convey to you all is actually the incredible value that a diversity of life experiences brings, and that includes really cross-cultural experiences, experiences of different kinds and types of work. So really very, very different to be doing kind of on the ground cross-disability outreach, let's say in northern Nepal, to working in a residential mental health setting in the US, to kind of engaging in services research. But I think they are not unrelated. They deepen our sensitivity to real world power dynamics, challenges, contingencies, to the, kind of very far reaching ways in which culture and geopolitical context, impact how we think, how we approach things, what's relevant and what's not. They challenge us. The more diversity of experiences we have as an individual, the more we're challenged to think more deeply and to question, I think, assumptions that we might otherwise bring to the table, unacknowledged assumptions, right, that just come from our own background, if we have not been kind of challenged to think differently, to experience other things, to adopt other cultural and disciplinary and experiential perspectives. And then I think that although there is a lot of kind of rhetorical kind of lip service paid to the importance of interdisciplinarity, I do often interdisciplinarity and also kind of diverse experiences and lived experience, intersectional lived experience in the sense of kind of race, culture, disadvantage taking the form of, kind of incarceration or periods of incarceration in the past, etc. So we pay a lot of lip service to that, but I think we don't always actually really invest in students and applicants and candidates for job positions of a variety of kinds who are bringing these really very diverse and different backgrounds to the table, and whose CV or resume may not look on paper like the sort of cookie cutter, went straight from secondary school to a, kind of elite university, got a lot of academic training in a very kind of concentrated and focused way, get very productivity right in terms of grants and applications. So I think like kind of really reorienting the field to embracing that the most kind of generative disruption and transformative change is going to come when we really can kind of look past kind of cookie cutter success and embrace people who are really kind of bringing difference, which I think aligns very much with the way that Niall introduced this panel. And I think that's probably enough for me, but I look forward to the discussion when we kind of circle back around.
Thank you very much, Nev. Now, I'm pleased to say that Ruby Castilla-Puentes has now joined us, and Ruby is from the Neuroscience Division of Janssen and Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals. And Ruby is going to talk about Latinas in corporate America, the importance of mentorship and training. Ruby, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Ruby Castilla, and I would like to, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I am from Colombia. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and I'm currently I am working in Johnson & Johnson and Janssen Pharmaceuticals. I am the study responsible physician for some of the clinical development products. And I just want to talk a little bit, and I don't know if I can share my screen, because I do have one slide just to talk with you about what my journey has been in this country. And what I would like to say is that I have been in 4 different industries, in GlaxoSmithKline, in Sanofi, and Merck, and this is in J&J. And I really encourage my students. I am a professor at the university, and I have students, and I encourage the education. Education is key. Anything that you can do in order to improve, to learn every day, to educate, is really important. But most important is to find out a mentor. The mentorship is key and has been a really a fundamental in my career during those years. I am also very involved in institutions, in NGOs, and also I was the president of the American Society of Hispanic Psychiatry for 20 to 22. And during the time that I was there, during the time that I was the president in this organization, I promote that mentorship, because I think this is key for all of us, but in general for the women. When we are trying to mimic other people's career, or we have a leader that we want to follow, it's important to have a mentor. So a little bit about other things that they are important, and is not only to be part of an organization, a big group, but also to be part of small groups, to create your own network, family, with friends, with neighbors, with communities. You have to create your own network, and also with them grow together. Is very important, as I mentioned, to be sure that you follow and you know what is your passion, and you follow that passion. It's important also that not always you start your career in the thing that you really like to be. I want to give you one example. Although I was practicing in Colombia, I was in the mental health unit in Bogota. When I moved to States, I had to start, passing all the tests and validations, and also to start at the university as a student. After being the director of a mental health unit, the person that was leading this group start to be a student at the School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh. So one important thing is that we need to be sure that we are able to transform these moments in life where you are in one point a leader and in one point a student, and you can take advantage of all of these journey. And after that, after the time that I was at the University of Pittsburgh, I learned, during that time, I learned through many mentors. I had the fortune to have Dr. James Perel and Dr. Boris Birmacher at the University of Pittsburgh, my mentors. They showed me the direction of the industry, that not only in academia, I have the opportunity to develop new products, new medications for the patients with psychiatric conditions, and they were key in my journey. So what I would like just to talk here is about that. Each person has its own journey, but in this journey, you need to have mentors. The importance of mentors, and especially women, we have now, we create this women NGO that is called WARMI, Women in Quechua Aymara. That is a network of women from Latin America, from Hispanics here in US, where we try to improve the mental health of women, because it's important that this is a goal for all of people involved in WARMI. So my recommendation, or what I would like to say here, is that if you have a passion, if you have something that you really want to do, it's the time, it's now, it's not tomorrow. You need to create your own network, but especially for women, the mentorship is key. I had the fortune to have my own my own network. In my family, we are four children, and there are 3 females. All the 4, we are physicians. We graduate from the same university in Bucaramanga, Colombia. So we have our own small network at home, but we have been growing and growing, and we have more and more people involved in the activities that we organize. So my advice to the people is mentorship is key and education is fundamental.
Thank you very much, Ruby. We'll return to many of those themes in our Q&A. I can see the questions are stacking up now, which is fantastic. Please keep them coming. But we're now going to move to our final speaker, who is Kathy Cresswell from the University of Oxford. And Kathy is going to talk to us about accessing support for your mental health career and the Mental Health Research Incubator. Kathy.
Thanks very much. Hopefully you can see my screen okay now. Yep. And thanks so much for inviting me. It's been such a pleasure to listen to all of the previous speakers. I've just got a slightly different kind of talk to talk a bit about one route for accessing some of the types of support that have been raised so far, certainly in the chat. And I noticed that people highlighted particular barriers, including being able to just find relevant information about building careers in mental health research, building collaborations, as well as opportunities for early career researchers to develop their careers. So we really wanted to take this opportunity to share with you the Mental Health Research Incubator, which has been supported particularly by the NIHR Academy, but we've also really benefited from working closely with members of MQ on this work. So the Mental Health Research Incubator the aim is really to provide inspiration, but also practical career advice for both current and aspiring mental health researchers. And the key thing that we do as an incubator is pool lots of information and share it through our website, but also through Twitter. So please do go and have a look at the website. One of the things that people tell us a lot is that it's difficult to know, what a mental health career can look like. And of course, in mental health research, we need to include people from a really broad range of backgrounds and contexts, and who bring a really broad range of experiences. And so we're continually pooling examples of the real diversity in mental health research careers that people have followed on the website. So if you have a look on there, you'll be able to see lots of examples of people from a really broad range of professional backgrounds, many whose careers have taken many twists and turns. And I hope that by looking at that, there'll be some inspiration for you to get a sense of the breadth of experiences that mental health researchers have. And I think there are many inspirational stories there, as we've heard from others in this panel today. So that's one good place to start. And actually, if you'd be happy to share your career journey, we'd be more than happy to host it. You can also access profession-specific advice, and saying profession here, I suppose, in a very broad sense of the word, because this includes advice for people from different professional backgrounds, but also for lived experience researchers who may be wanting to further develop their mental health research careers. And in terms of building collaborations, one of the things that we have on the Mental Health Research Incubator website is a map, which currently is predominantly UK focused, but actually you can add yourself to the map from wherever you are in the world. But currently most of the activity is in the UK. And essentially what this allows you to do is add yourself to the map and sort of put your pin in identifying what your professional background is. And then if somebody, for example, really wants to find a health economist who's interested in mental health research, who's in the north of England, they can very easily find that person, make links, and start a conversation. So please do add yourselves to the map, but also use the map to find potential collaborators that you might like to link up with. Also, you'll be able to find lots of blogs and other articles, particularly thinking about the specific challenges faced by people from different professional backgrounds that are often underrepresented in mental health research, such as social work, nursing. And there have been some really nice articles recently, and one of them builds on the last speaker really nicely. Just recently, we've posted a blog from two early career researchers talking about their experiences of mentoring and how they found a mentor and how valuable that's been for them. And we've also got some other really nice material that was recently posted about equality, diversity and inclusion in mental health research. So definitely picking up many of the themes that have been talked about today. As people have mentioned in the chat, just knowing about the funding opportunities can be tricky. We can't promise to be comprehensive, but we do try and share funding opportunities that we're aware of. So that's one place that you can have a look for that kind of thing. And also people mentioned just opportunities for early career researchers. So something that we've launched over the last year is a program called GROW, which is a development program for early career researchers. It's a competitive program that people apply for, but if they're successful in joining the program, they receive one-to-one professional coaching to help them think about their career goals, but also become part of a supported peer network with the other members of the panel. And we're very careful to choose people who work across disciplines and include research beyond academia. And you can see the range of topics that we tend to focus on in the sessions listed here. And just to introduce you to our current set of GROW participants. So this is all UK based currently because of the nature of the funding. But as you'll see here, we have a really fantastic set of researchers who actually come from all over the country and bring a really broad and diverse set of experience. So there are lots of ways you can get involved in the Mental Health Research Incubator. The easiest one is have a look at the website for career advice, but also do follow the incubator on Twitter. And also we'd love it if you'd like to share your career journey to help inspire or motivate others, help them recognise some of the practical challenges and how people have overcome them. Do also add your interest to the map so that people can find you and use it to find other people. And we do have a newsletter if you want to also keep up with the latest opportunities. And just before I finish, one other fantastic thing that you can get involved in, which you may have come across at earlier stages in the week through the MQ events, is the Mental Health Research Matters campaign, which is happening at the moment, which is all about really trying to amplify why mental health research matters, what good mental health research look like, and how we can all make a difference. And so a lot of this involves themes that really pick up on many of the things raised in today's session. So there are some really fantastic animations that are good to share with colleagues to encourage them to recognise the importance of mental health research. And I saw an interesting comment in the chat about, you know, issues in some parts of the world with stigma, and then the responses people get when they suggest getting involved in mental health research. So possibly these animations might be useful to share. Would certainly be interested in your feedback to help people understand why we need mental health research and also what good mental health research looks like. So please do come to the forthcoming webinars on that, have a look at the blogs, but particularly join the conversation on Twitter about why mental health research matters to you and share any content and opportunities there. So I just wanted to take that opportunity too, as I think it very much picks up on many of the themes that have come up in this session. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Now, if you're watching this online, you can be forgiven for feeling a bit overwhelmed. We have lots of stuff in the chat. There's also a hashtag on Twitter. The details again are in the chat. This recording will, of course, be available on MQ's YouTube channel for you to watch back after the event. But we're going to move to questions now. And the first question which I have is quite a short one, but so I'm going to expand it a little, if I may. And this is from an anonymous attendee who asks, is it true that people in India have huge phone coverage? And I think what this relates to is the role of digital. Now, digital, as we know, has had a huge amount of interest in delivering mental health services in the past few years, especially with the pandemic. But I wonder what the panel think about how digital technology might facilitate people's involvement in careers in mental health research and maybe break down some of the barriers that we've been talking about. So I wonder who'd like to speak to that. Perhaps Manvi, would you like to start on that question?
Does actually have a very wide coverage of, where I think even the smallest kids that we see, they have a phone in their hands. And of course, we have a very huge youth population. I think it's somewhere around 25 to 30% population in India is youngsters, is below the age of 32. So we do have a very wide population of youth, and that obviously translates that there's going to be a lot of usage and harnessing the power of digital, as I said. So we do have that, and besides that, I think, but we cannot be ignorant of the fact that there are obviously with digital come a lot of barriers and challenges. And one of those is that with digital, we're not sure that a lot of people are not aware that a lot of things that are available on the internet may not be from a trusted source. And so you never know what you're trusting on the internet. The second one is that obviously digital, when we're looking at the general population, when I see around myself, I think all of us here are somehow privileged in some sense to be sitting here and be using a laptop and attending this. But there's a lot of dusty corners that we often ignore. And so digital is not accessible to a lot of people. A lot of people have never held a phone in their hands. So that's obviously a point. But I think, for a moment, when we see the positive side is that there is in fact a lot of improvement, and a lot of people are increasingly becoming aware of digital. And in fact, the fact that this webinar in itself is a whole digital science festival itself translates to how digital has become so important, especially in the field of mental health, where such webinars, online therapy sessions, advocacy, activism, and a lot of things have moved online. So I think, digital has played a powerful role in the past couple of years and will continue to play a powerful role in the years to come.
So Nev, I wonder what you make of that. I mean, clearly there's the potential for great inclusion, but the other thing I got from what you said, Manvi, was that there's the potential to in some ways widen the degree of exclusion for people who don't have access to digital.
I think that's a big concern, and also at a more kind of macro policy level, the risk that technology becomes a substitute for really investing in training and quality improvement within the mental health workforce. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in the US is literally the development of avatars to replace, whether it's peer specialists or kind of peer supporters, clinicians, psychiatrists even, based on very kind of complex algorithms. So interacting with an individual who is not human, who is AI. So I think there's a real risk also there of diverting funding away from actually exactly what we're talking about, which is investing in the not just the research, but the workforce in the broadest sense, providers, practitioners, and diverting that money into kind of tech development. And there's risks of privatization there. And then privatization, especially in a global context, we see again and again play out in a way that ultimately exacerbates global north-south inequalities, because who holds the patents and who controls the technology.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Nev, which is that, this stuff hasn't sort of arrived in our laps, that someone owns it and someone controls it. And we need to think about these concerns when we're involving technology in all parts of mental health, including service delivery and, of course, in career development. Ruby, I wonder if I could turn to you, if you could pop your screen on, please. Okay, I think Ruby's having some problems joining us, so I'll turn to Ollie. I wonder if you could respond to those points about the potential for digital's involvement in developing mental health careers and what some of the downsides might be.
So I guess for me, that initially, I think one of the upsides of digital can be on helping to drive that collaboration across borders and across boundaries, because I think often as mental health researchers we can get quite siloed, and particularly if we're working in smaller institutions or places that don't have a great deal of experience within mental health research, being able to communicate with people all over the world and from other institutions, from other countries, cultures, I think is really powerful. So I think that there are some really significant benefits, and I think that some of the potential downsides highlighted by Manvi and Nev, I think are really important to kind of bear in mind in terms of making sure that we don't prioritize necessarily some of the digital stuff at the expense of individuals and, you know, having humans involved in the research. So I don't really have anything else to add to that.
So Kathy, your project is specifically a digital project, and that's something which would maybe not have been possible, 25, 30 years ago. Do you think that there's some transformative potential for digital in increasing the visibility of diversity within the mental health field and providing the opportunities for people to link in and be encouraged to join?
I mean, I think there definitely are. I think I'd very much reiterate what others have said, that, you know, there are huge opportunities from digital, but with that comes some risks that we need to be really careful about. I think we've definitely seen over the last couple of years the move to more working online and sharing through digital has definitely, I think, helped inclusivity in mental health research in many ways, particularly in a lot of the work that we do with, so I work with children and young people with mental health problems, and we work a lot with parents and carers as well. We've been able to involve people with lived experience with much more diverse sort of range of backgrounds and experiences, because we've been able to engage people online as well as face to face, which is just much more accessible for many people, you know, particularly, you know, if people have caring commitments, people live in rural locations, if people have mobility issues. I mean, there are all, you know, lots and lots of reasons, and I think that applies to the researchers themselves as well, of course. And through the GROW program, certainly the fact that a lot of it has been done online has worked very well for many researchers who would have found it very difficult to come together physically on every occasion. But having said that, it's also been really notable how important the face-to-face events have been as part of that program, and how people have definitely felt they've got something extra from those. So it's all about trying to get that balance of, you know, making use of the opportunities digital brings, but not forgetting the importance of those in-person interactions, as others have said.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions and not a lot of time, so I'm going to move on to the next one. This is a comment from an attendee from Nigeria who says, I think one challenge to developing a career in mental health is veiled or even open family and societal resistance towards those at the verge of considering careers in mental health, especially in a low middle income country like mine, where stigma is still an issue. So is this a barrier, do you think, to people getting involved in mental health research? Manvi, what do you think?
It's definitely a barrier. In fact, I think stigma kind of, I see it as an anti-democratic element that exists in the mental health space, because it does not allow those with lived experience. I mean, the basic concept of democracy is to basically hold everybody together and make them the base of all the decisions that are being taken place, and make them the base of all the programs and policies that are taking place. However, what stigma does, it in context of people with lived experience, it does not allow them to come in the picture. It makes it an unsafe space for them to come in the picture. And then that itself, I think it de-democratizes the entire space of mental health and its development and mental health research. So I think, yeah, I definitely see it as a huge challenge.
And of course, this is highlighting the challenge in low and middle income countries, but I think it's also maybe still a challenge in some high income countries. And I mean, Ollie, I wonder if when you chose psychiatry as your specialty, what the attitude was of your peers towards that, and to people at your medical school, your training scheme.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because that stigma definitely exists within the UK as well. So I had a lot of questions from family to start with, saying, you know, why would you want to work in mental health? What is it about mental health that's attracting you? And it wasn't necessarily, it was very veiled stigma. So the intention behind it was clearly, please don't do that. But it was said in a way of kind of questioning me. And then peers as well. So I have had colleagues throughout my career who've said things like, oh, why, you're a good doctor, why are you wasting yourself on a career in mental health? You could be a renal physician or do intensive care, you could be a surgeon. And I would always just say, I'm not interested in those things. There are other doctors who are. My passion is working with people with mental illness and trying to make a difference to those people's lives and trying to help some of the people who I think are the most vulnerable in our society. So that stigma, I think, definitely exists. And I think maybe in the UK and in other kind of more economically developed countries, it's maybe slightly more veiled than it is in other areas of the world, particularly the global south. I think the other thing that I would say is that in our work, or in my work, I often come up against a lot of stigma from people who, or not from people, but within families. So for the patients or the service users who have mental health problems, and sometimes that stops people getting involved in research as participants. And I've had it before where I've seen somebody in the clinic and said, come to the conclusion that this person maybe has a diagnosis of a mental health condition, and said, there are research opportunities if you'd like to be involved in studies or, questionnaires, whatever it happens to be. And families kind of just saying, well, no, absolutely not. This is for the family. This is just for us. So I think anything that we can do to try and break down those barriers and break down that stigma is absolutely essential. And I think that a lot of the work that organizations like MQ do is really helping to challenge that, and the amazing work of my co-panelists, really.
So Manvi, you've got your hand up.
I started to publish my story as an opinion piece at a lot of places when I first wanted to tell everybody that, okay, I live with this condition, I'm not ashamed of it. So when I did that, I think the first stroke of stigma that I received was from my own family. Because they started to feel that, you don't have to, why do you have to necessarily put it out there? Why do you have to let people know it's a personal thing? And they tried to cover it up using all other kinds of excuses, but it was stigma, which was, it was stigma disguised as other excuses. So I think that's definitely relatable. There is still stigma, especially, I think stigma is a little lesser in high income countries and a little more in low and middle income countries. Also, I think when we speak about problems like stigma, we often do not take into consideration stigma in rural settings, because especially in a country like India, like I have seen it around myself, stigma in rural settings is on a whole new level. It's termed as somebody being possessed. And a lot of those things. So I think that at times, it becomes, it's very painful to see all of that happen. And that is also something that organizations today want to tackle, but are not able to. They're not able to find the right resources or the right approach on how to tackle stigma in rural settings. So I think, I just wanted to address that and add it on so that we also have that in our minds.
You raised a very interesting point, Manvi, which is that I think one of the things over the past few years we've come to recognize is the importance of communities. And I wonder if the community of lived experience and the community of mental health research might of itself help to counteract some of that exclusion and that stigma, or at least that in theory it might. I wonder, would you think of that, Neb?
Sorry, I was just typing.
That's
through that
right.
one more time now.
That's right. Manvi's just been talking about stigma, and that it's very widespread, that exists within professions, exists within families. And I wonder if the kinds of communities which can be offered by lived experience involvement in mental health research might help to counteract that in some way, if there's maybe a supportive role there.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, we want massive cultural change. While we are all sort of chipping away at that, I think absolutely, and what I was just typing actually in response to Catherine was about some of the specifically sort of lived experience research networks that exist, but also, there's equivalents obviously for advocacy, activism, policy roles. And what I think is partly so powerful there is that when you're experiencing kind of stigma in isolation, it's very powerful. And when you have other people who are also experiencing that, to kind of discuss and just get that sort of validation, and validation in the sense that you really know that they know exactly what it's like, they exactly kind of understand and grasp what you're going through, that really helps to kind of deflect a lot of the sort of the negative power of those experiences. And also, I mean, it's ultimately it's collective kind of organizing, collective initiatives and efforts that are going to bring about change. So the more that we can get people together, there's much more power in us when we come together as groups than any of us have as individuals. So I think those things can play a powerful role. And we also see it, graduate students suffer a lot, right? All different forms of sort of labor exploitation, extreme stress, extreme sort of competition for far too few jobs and positions. And so I think, again, you actually see a huge amount of kind of mutual aid and mutual support just happening among regular psychiatry trainees and graduate students, like in general. And that's hugely powerful.
Thank you. That's interesting. And I wonder, Kathy, we've heard so much more about mental health in the mainstream media in the last 10 years, especially. I mean, that's certainly a change I've noticed since when I joined the Lancet in 2010. There's very little about mental health in the media. Now you'll read a story about mental health practically every day. Is this, from your point of view, having a destigmatizing effect with people going into careers in mental health research? Have you seen this reflected at all in your work with the incubator?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to say whether that's had an impact on numbers of people wanting to go into mental health research careers, because we know obviously our capacity, the size of the workforce is still very small relative to many other research areas, and definitely we're punching well below our weight. So it's hard to know whether the size of the workforce has increased as a result of that. And I guess there would be quite a slow trickle through anyway, quite possibly. But I know certainly, as Ollie was saying, I mean, in psychiatry, there's a huge lack of people moving into research. And I think, and what we would hope is that, younger people who've grown up, certainly, I think this is true in the UK, with a much more open dialogue about mental health, I hope will be much more open and interested in taking this stuff forward. So as we move forwards, we'll be able to see those differences, but I'm not sure we've seen the knock-on effects as yet. But I guess that even, there's two parts of it, isn't there? There's one is that we need people to see mental health research as an important and valued and valuable thing to do. The other is we have to make sure the opportunities are there for them to be able to pursue it. And I know that I can see in the comments, that's often one of the challenges that people face as well.
Thank you. And Nev, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to also make the point, Niall often makes this point, but there's hierarchies even within mental health. And I think experiences and conditions we label as serious mental illness, like schizophrenia, often are really stigmatized even within the larger mental health fields. And in the US, we have an absolutely astronomical program around, at all levels, social work, counseling, psychology. Psychiatry, I think it's less of an issue, interestingly, right? But for the sort of psychosocial side disciplines, folks not wanting to work with individuals experiencing schizophrenia or other, again, what we would label as serious mental illness. So I think that's something to say too, and that where even in countries where we see some progress on stigma against depression and anxiety, we actually well-documented, really solid epi research showing worsening of stigma towards people with, for example, schizophrenia. So I think we have to keep talking about that.
We have a few more questions in the chat. Now, the first is thoughts on what opportunities for people with lived experience are missing from mental health research and what could be done to open these opportunities up. Now, this, of course, we've spoken about, but if anyone has anything to add on what those gaps are of opportunity and how they can be addressed. I'd be very interested to hear it. Manvi, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
I think there's a couple of things that that one could definitely add there, and that is that when we're speaking about lived experience, I think we also need to consider that with lived experience of mental health conditions or mental distress, there also comes lived experience of a lot of other, intersectional factors. Like somebody could identify as being a part of the LGBTQ community, and they could be living with a mental health condition or mental distress. So when we're speaking about opportunities for them, how do we uniquely design those opportunities, and what are the unique needs or requirements that we'll need to design for those specific opportunities? So I think that is definitely important, and that is also missing when we speak about opportunities for people with lived experience. We often miss out on the intersectionality part of those opportunities. So yeah, I think that's definitely important. Another thing is that we talk about engagement, but I think it's also very important, like I said, as part of my presentation as well, that we also speak about leadership by people with lived experience, because we do not just want to be involved, at a stage where there's already a blueprint in front of us, and we're asked that, what else do we add to this blueprint, or what do we subtract from here? But it's also very important to have those with lived experience from a stage where you just have a blank paper in front of you, and you ask them that where do we and how do we draw the first line on this paper? So I think it's very important to have, those with lived experience. There's a gap. Like, I think they're being involved and engaged, but they're not leading yet. We have very few leadership positions for those with lived experience, and I think that is something that we need to definitely work on.
Thank you. Ollie.
I think one of the big challenges is often funding. So particularly in my experience, applications for funding almost always center around a researcher-focused approach. And actually, the NIHR, which is a UK-based organisation for health and care research, recently had a funding call out which was trying to drive more people with lived experience to be more deeply involved in research design. And often the funding calls that come out from funders ask for, did you have any patient or service user or carer involvement in the preparation of the bid? And it almost feels like an afterthought sometimes. And I think that if there were more programs that more deeply embedded that into the research focus, I think it would be really powerful. So I think that would be one way of improving and increasing the lived experience voice, really.
Thanks. What I'd like to do now is open this question out by adding another to it. Now, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. There's one specific one, Kathy, which is a yes or no answer, which is mental health research incubator offered to non-UK citizens?
Sadly, no. So I did put a slightly longer response to that in the thing, but
Okay.
because it's funded by the Department of Health and Social Care,
Right,
currently
okay.
not. However, we've learned a lot from doing it, and it would, I think, require a different funder to be more widely available. However, we've learned a lot from doing it. We'd be very keen to share that if there are other opportunities for people from other parts of the world.
Thank you. Now, the next question which I have is again quite a specific one, but I think we can broaden it out to some of these themes we've been talking about. Now, this person has asked what short courses or programs are available for those whose basic or first degrees are not primarily in mental health, but want to get additional knowledge or certifications in mental health. Now, if you know of any of those, please put them in the chat, or I'd like to hear about them. But I think this also speaks to the point you made, Nev, about this fact that we say we want this diverse field, we say we want everyone's voices to be heard, and yet we have these, as you put it, cookie cutter ideas about, high school degree or, sixth form degree or whatever, followed by a university degree, postgraduate, list of publications, lists of projects funded, and the decisions are still made on that basis as to who gets to speak, who gets published. How do we begin to break out of that, Nev?
Oh, that's another. I mean, I think there's very entrenched cultural, and I mean culture in academia, academic culture, research culture, and because it's such a long training process. By the time you get to be certainly in any, even a lower level leadership position in academia or in research, you've been through years and years in the system, being acculturated to thinking and valuing certain things. It's a hugely bureaucratic. Universities are, as sort of types of entities or institutions. And so it's very hard to change things. So I think one sort of low-hanging fruit that helps is if more conferences and events really reoriented themselves to deep discussion and critique of these issues. So I think the sort of the invisibility people have on their own one-off conversations all the time, I'm sure, but in invisibility when it comes to more kind of public forums and conferences and deliberations. So I think that that's something that would really help. MQ, welcome, well-positioned sort of funders and foundations could really kind of help push some of that, and push when it comes to funding, a different metrics being deployed to really look much more deeply about level of involvement, level of compensation, and like really trying to guard against the sort of much more kind of tokenistic or kind of hierarchically subjugated ways in which the diversity in various ways, right? This also happens on race, ethnicity, geography, right? Global South inclusion. So often we see it's really tokenistic. So, I mean, I think we have to be we know that is what we're going to expect. The norm is going to be tokenism. How do we push groups, centers, proposal teams to move away from that?
Yes, and I think one of the things in mental health is that we hear a lot of time, perhaps appropriately so, the language of crisis and the language of urgency. But of course, one of the problems, if you're always in this mode of crisis and urgency, is that's inimical to diversifying in some ways, because when you feel that you're in an urgent crisis situation, you'll tend to reach for what you know and for the people you know and for things you're comfortable with. So maybe what we need to do, as well as build those spaces where we can sit back and do those sort of deep dives and those conversations. Kathy, I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, well, just picking up on the point you're making there, I think that we have recently through the UKRI mental health research networks, we've seen some really good examples of how that's been addressed, because so UKRI supported 8 mental health research networks, and which were really about building communities and facilitating kind of underpinning research to grow capacity. And what that meant, and it was very much a focus on throughout them, meaningful involvement of people with lived experience and work across disciplines and across sectors, and that's been very true of all of those networks. And it meant, for example, when the pandemic came along and there was an urgency to deliver research, it meant that some of the networks were really well equipped, because they already had really good working relationships with people with relevant lived experience, had really good cross-sector networks, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that has really shown in how the networks were able to respond to the pandemic. And one of the things particularly that's been done across the networks, we certainly did this in Emerging Minds, which is the network that I lead, is supporting the development of special interest research groups. And the way that we did that in Emerging Minds is that we received applications for special interest research groups to address areas of unmet need in research, and we provided funding specifically to support lived experience involvement. And so what that meant was that these groups could get together, have discussions, have conversations, think about where they wanted to take the research, prepare grant applications, put together workshops and so on. And the lived experience part of it was funded, and which, as Parissa's mentioned in the chat, is often a real problem. So not only did it mean that those people were poised if a grant call came out, but also they just had a bit more time to be able to think with people with relevant lived experience about how to take the research forward. So I'd really encourage the funders on this call to be sort of thinking about those kind of models and how they could be used going forwards to enable, meaningful lived experience involvement, rather than this kind of rush that we often see.
Those who have seen me chair panels before know that I like to end with a roundup question. And my brief for this is that I like the question to be answered within the length of time of a very short elevator journey, or 280 characters or less. So my question for all of our panelists in turn is, what one line would you say to encourage someone into a career in mental health research? Manvi, I wonder if we could start with you.
That's a tough one. That's one I didn't prepare for. All right. I think the one line would probably be, like, I'm a lived experience expert, so keeping that in mind, I think the one line would simply be that speak your truth. I think it's not even a line, it's just 3 words. I think that is, and I think anybody with lived experience, or anybody who has actually been through anything, I'm sure we all have been through our own battles, would understand what that means without me having to actually elaborate much on that. So I think those 3 words are really magic.
Thank you. Nev.
Mine would be the change you want to see.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ollie.
I think I would say to healthcare professionals who want to be involved in research, clinical careers are fascinating and amazing. You can make a difference to individuals' lives, but by doing research, you can make a difference to potentially hundreds or thousands or millions of people's lives. And if that sounds interesting to you, then come and join a career in mental health research.
Thank you. And finally, Kathy.
I was going to say a very similar thing to Ollie. There's still so much that we don't know. There is so much that we need to know. So there is a huge potential to make a huge difference by getting involved in mental health research.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such a fantastic discussion. We're now going to move on to the next point in our proceedings. But before we leave, thank you again to all of our panel. Thanks for all the fantastic comments in the chat. And I look forward to the rest of the afternoon. Helen.
Just wanted to say absolutely massive thanks to Niall for amazing chairing, as always, but all the panelists for so kindly sharing your amazing experiences. Just a really wonderful and inspirational session. So I'm going to give you a huge clap because no one else can unmute to do that. So thank you ever so much. And really fantastic to hear so many different options and pathways for becoming involved in mental health research and support services, and really appreciate you also highlighting the many challenges involved in this area, but also providing some great suggestions for how we can move forwards in this space. So huge thank you to all of you, and please bear with us because you'll have the opportunity to ask many of these speakers more questions in the Zoom meeting later on today. So we'll now move on to the poster session. And if you've been to some of our previous events this week, you'll have noticed already, but if not, then this year MQ has implemented a creative approach for poster presentations in an attempt to make the research people are talking about more accessible. And that is in the format of TikTok videos. So we're now going to watch the final 4 of those videos. And I just want to flag that unfortunately, one of them has quite poor sound quality. So please bear with us. We wanted to include it because they've gone to so much effort to create it, but just be kind of conscious of that. And I'd now therefore like to invite you to sit back and enjoy the presentations.
You have to stay home again. We need another lockdown. If there was another coronavirus or crisis in 5 to 10 years, would we know what young people would need?
Young people's mental health largely worsened during the pandemic, but the reasons why were complex. Our review found only 47 studies that captured qualitative data compared to hundreds of quantitative studies out there. It still paints a complex picture about how young people experience the pandemic, but minoritized and marginalized voices are still missing.
We found this out by doing a qualitative review to help us understand quantitative findings. Other systematic reviews have focused mainly on quantitative studies and lacked patient and public involvement. Our primary aim was to examine the perceived impact of COVID-19 on young people's mental health and well-being across Europe. We conducted our review with young people with lived experience. We set about using the co-production principles such as share and power.
We registered the review, operationalized mental health and searched 6 databases and Google and charity websites. We then screened the literature, extracted the data and assessed the quality and bias. We made sure we were all on the same page by coming to a shared agreement in all. We finally grouped the results and themes. We used these areas to create our search strategies. Now for the results.
Of the 47 studies included in our review, 74% were from the UK and 62% generated data during the first COVID wave. We found these 5 themes. Continued access to information about the pandemic and restrictions didn't help young people's mental health and well-being, which actually tended to fluctuate. However, the reasons for this were complex and formulated an interplay of having poor quality social connections, a lack of appropriate mental health support and educational support and good self-care.
So if it happened again, would we know what to do to help young people? Not yet. Why? Because many voices were missing from our synthesis, and so we still need to find out about the impact of the pandemic on minoritized and marginalized groups across numerous European countries, specifically low and middle income countries, and more about the long-term impact. We also need more co-production.
So now we need to prioritise young people when making decisions about their mental health, provide accessible tailored support, and not assume everyone has the same experience of COVID-19. Prioritise self-care like sleep and exercise, and avoid pressuring young people to catch up in school and university.
Only then will we ensure that all the voices are heard and everyone gets the right support at the right time following COVID. The lack of qualitative research across Europe compared to quantitative research may suggest a lack of prioritisation in integrating young people's views into much needed support during and following COVID-19. It is important that young people are empowered to make decisions in their own care and in research going forward, which may help drive policy change, anticipating a future systemic crisis.
Thank you for listening, and to all those young people who have taken part in research during the pandemic.
Currently, there are long waiting times to see a mental health professional, and young people are not getting timely help. The Timely Project on early identification of young people's mental health problems has identified 287 risk factors for mental health problems. We're using this list of risk factors to develop and test early identification tools, which help to identify emerging mental health problems earlier. This will mean young people can be offered more proactive support when they need it. So what has this project involved? First, we searched literature and spoke to professionals to identify risk factors for mental health problems. Next, we grouped these factors into a framework made up of different life course stages and domains. Then, we ran a survey where we got views from around 40 mental health experts. After refining the framework, we explored how many of this list of nearly 300 factors we could actually measure in a de-identified database. This database covers most of the population of Wales and relates to health, education, and social service interactions for young people. So what? Why does it matter? Well, if we want to spot mental health problems earlier, as they start developing, we need to know what risk factors are important predictors of young people's mental health problems. Early identification is really important for a number of reasons. First, it means young people can get appropriate support before they experience long periods of distress. Second, this support can happen before things like friendships and school life have been affected. Third, spotting emerging problems earlier means quicker but lighter touch support can be offered. This could be offered in the community instead of by already overstretched child and adolescent mental health services. Basically, more timely identification means more timely support. So how will impact happen? Well, at the moment we're developing early identification models using the risk factors from this study. We'll test out these models in one population in Wales and then see if the models still work in other populations, like those in Cambridge, Birmingham and Essex. We're also working with focus groups of young people, parents and carers to understand what they want to see in any early identification tools. This engagement with young people and families is critical for making sure the models we develop can be used in practice, rather than just staying in a research journal filed away somewhere. These focus groups are helping us to understand how young people's data should be used and what a good pathway of care might actually look like. We'll also engage with professionals so they can tell us what they need out of usable tools too. In summary, we've used a survey method to develop a framework of hundreds of risk factors for young people's mental health problems. This framework will help us develop tools to spot emerging mental health problems and offer more proactive support to young people and their families. Engagement with young people, families and professionals is helping us to understand what a good pathway of care might actually look like.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here today. I am Paushika, Faculty of Medicine, University of Jaffna, Sri Lanka. I am here today to talk to you about mental health condition and associated factors among all the individuals in Northern Province, Sri Lanka. Our emotional, psychological and social well-being all contribute to our mental health. There is a high chance of mental health issues among the elderly persons. Northern province of Sri Lanka is one of the low resource setting in the nation as well as a war-ravaged region, where they live alone due to the loss of their children in a war, and some of their children have migrated to overseas. Depression and anxiety disorders are recognized as serious mental health issues that have a negative impact, so early screening is essential to reduce the burden. As a result, we conduct a study in the northern province of Sri Lanka to determine the level of anxiety and depression and associated factors among people aged above 50 years. A community-based cross-sectional study was carried out in northern province Sri Lanka. The subjects were aged above 50 years who speak Tamil and permanent residents in the northern province. Face-to-face interview was carried out by using the General Anxiety Disorder 2 items and Patient Health Questionnaire 2. Binary logistic regression analysis was used to assess the level of anxiety and depression and associated factors. The response rate was 93.7% and mean age was 65.4 years. 61.9 were females, 97.3 were Sri Lankan Tamils, 59.3 were married, 46.1 were homemaker, and 33% had higher educational level. Possible anxiety and depression was encountered among 9.5% and 6.1% respectively. Either possible anxiety or depression was encountered among 12.3%. Odds of exposure of high risk for obstructive sleep apnea, female, less number of members in the household, not having a partner were higher, and odds of exposure for high minutes per week and higher educational level were lower among individuals with anxiety or depression. As you can see in this slide, anxiety and depression have been identified as a significant mental health problems in elderly population in Sri Lanka's northern province. Finally, I would like to thank our funding body and all the collaborators in this project. Thank you.
Do you know someone who is struggling with mental health problems but aren't getting the help that they need? Here at the University of Cambridge, we are working on a project to link together de-identified data from organisations like the NHS, social services and schools. Putting this data together can let us see the full picture of what is going on in young people's lives. This can be really useful. For example, we can teach a computer how to spot patterns in the data that tell us when a young person may need support for their mental health. This information can help us keep young people from falling through the gaps and get them the right kind of help earlier. As the first step, we needed to find out what the public thought about the project. To do this, we worked with the children's charity, the Anna Freud Centre, and put on a series of online workshops for young people aged 11 to 24 and parents and guardians. We focused on including people from underrepresented groups to ensure we heard from a variety of perspectives. We found that people thought that linking data from different organisations was actually a great idea. Our participants told us that we should make sure to include as much accurate information as possible, especially when the data is sensitive. Our participants told us that the data should be interpreted by a trained professional. The young person and family should have an input into their data and healthcare. And resources should be available for young people who do need help. We also asked how people felt about other researchers using this type of linked database, and what types of organisations should be able to access the data. They told us that having trust is the most important aspect when making that decision. Researchers need to show that they are doing research for the right intentions and reasons to help young people's well-being, and that they have a track record to show that they are competent. We learned that our participants believe that we should use existing data to improve young people's well-being. Although it is really important for researchers to be fully transparent about why they are accessing the data, they should also share their findings with the public in plain English.
The public should be involved throughout the project, especially people from underrepresented groups. Involving the public is very important to understand different perspectives and concerns. Our youngest participants asked insightful questions and made meaningful suggestions.
We'll carry on working towards using digital tools to help get young people mental health help sooner rather than later.
We need people like you to continue getting involved in research to improve healthcare for the next generations.
Fabulous. So massive thanks to all of these TikTok presenters for creating such wonderfully engaging posters to share their fantastic mental health research. It's been really great to see all of the posters this week, and a huge thanks to all of the different presenters who've created just fabulous presentations and really embraced this quite different format. It's obviously taken them quite a lot of time to create them, but I hope you agree that it's a really accessible way to share this fantastic research. We've had so many fabulous presentations that it's been almost impossible for our panel to choose between them, but we have now decided the winners, and we've decided instead of one prize, we're actually going to give two, because it was just that difficult to choose. So we're giving £200 for the first place and £100 for second place. And I'm now delighted to announce the winners. So coming in first place with the highest overall score is Coral Manji Kavindu Fumeni from University of York, and huge apologies because I'm completely unable to pronounce that. So very, very sorry about that, but massive congratulations for winning the first prize. You gave a fantastic presentation entitled Prevalence of Overweight and Obesity and its Determinants in People with Severe Mental Illness in South Asia. So huge congratulations to you. And in second place is Afshan Shahid from the Services Institute of Medical Sciences in Pakistan, who earlier in the week gave a presentation on prevalence and predictors for anxiety and depression in residents of Lahore, Pakistan, a community-based surveillance program from a lower middle income country. So I hope you will join me in congratulating our two winners, and MQ will be in touch with you both about your prizes very shortly. So I'd now like to take the opportunity to say absolutely massive thanks to everyone who has made this festival such a huge success. It's been an absolute honor to be part of it. Huge thanks to all the chairs and panelists across all 5 days who've so generously shared their experiences, to the wonderful festival steering committee for the fabulous input they provided to shape this quite different type of festival, and most of all to the wonderful MQ team for their unbelievable hard work, amazing organisation and support in producing such a wonderful week-long festival. Huge thanks to all of you. Really, really appreciated. So before I hand over to Lee to tell you about the optional Zoom meeting that follows, I'd like to encourage you all to fill out the feedback form. I think there's a link in the chat. This will hugely help us to improve and shape future events at MQ. And please continue sharing your reflections and thoughts on the festival on social media using the hashtag MQ Science Festival. You can find and share the recorded talks and presentations of all days of the festival on the MQ YouTube channel, and you can see our wonderful TikTok presenters presenting their posters on the MQ TikTok channel as well. So hopefully the links are in the chat for you. I'll now hand over to Lee, who's going to explain how you can access the Zoom meeting to carry on the conversation about careers in mental health and anything else that you wish to discuss. Thanks, Lee.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you to everyone who's been speaking today. As we know, this is the last day of the festival, so I just want to say a huge thank you to the organising panel that have put this whole thing together. It wouldn't be possible without all of their input. So a big thank you to our chair, Helen Fisher, and to the panel made up of Rajika Gujwani, Reza Madzadeh, Eves Mil Zuniga, Ruby Castella Puentes, Manvi Tiwari, Joshua Rothman, Damien Juma, Ines Pote and Catherine Smith. A huge thank you to all of you, and also to the MQ team that have been working behind the scenes, led ably by Parissa Mansouri. A big thank you as well to the research team, Mariana Bolivar and Hala Rashidi, and a massive thank you to the whole marketing team led by Bryony Dowdy, who've pulled all this together, and it's been a real whole team effort in the background. So a thank you to all of you, and a big thank you as well to Wellcome, who I've said at the start funded this whole festival, and thanks to their support we've been able to make it completely free to all. And because of that and the online way in which we've run it, we have managed to have a far bigger reach, I believe, globally than we've ever had before. So a big thank you to Wellcome as well. A huge thank you, everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed this year's festival and enjoy the ongoing conversations.